The other young man that you may recognize from sitting up here this evening is Dr. Bernard Harris. He's going to come chat with us in a moment, but before he does, I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. His bio is located in the program. Certainly take it home and spend some time with it. He asked me not to read the entire thing, and I won't. But you should know that first of all, he and I share the same hometown. At least we went to the same high school in the same city, San Antonio. He's a few years ahead of me. He's a graduate of Sam Houston High School in San Antonio, and my husband knows they were the Cherokees. Okay, and he is of course an astronaut and the president of the Harris Foundation. He thinks this is important to listen to because when you may be thinking, well, gee, how do I become an astronaut? Well, here you go. First, I mentioned he graduated from high school. He also holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Houston, a Master of Medical Science from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, a Master of Business Administration from the University of Houston Clear Lake, and a Doctorate of Medicine from Texas Tech University. He worked at NASA for 10 years, where he conducted research in musculoskeletal physiology and disuse osteoporosis. Later, as the head of the Exercise Countermeasure Project, he conducted clinical investigation of space adaptation and developed in-flight medical devices to extend astronaut stays in space. You may hear different times now about how astronauts get to stay in space for so long. Well, he helped develop the technology that allowed that to occur. He was selected into the astronaut corps in January of 1990. Dr. Harris was a mission specialist on the Space Shuttle Columbia. He also was a payload commander on the Space Shuttle Discovery. He served on the first flight of the joint Russian-American space program, becoming the first African-American to walk in space. He is a veteran astronaut for over 19 years. He's logged more than 438 hours and traveled over 7.2 million miles in space. And I've heard the Earth looks really beautiful from ways. Please help me welcome our distinguished speaker this evening, Dr. Bernard Harris.
Well, Laura, thank you very much for that introduction. I know it is a pleasure to be here this evening. Let me say hello to my good friend Wanda Adams. Thank you so much for what you do in the city, and she's actually responsible for me being here. So let's give her a hand. Really. Thank all of you for being here this evening to support such a great institution. I didn't know very much about South Community Association Development Corporation, and I certainly didn't know about the STEM Foundation, but I do know a lot about STEM, and it's nice to see such a vast and productive and community effort that's going on in the city. And so I think you deserve a hand. So when I was asked to give a talk today, or they're still working on the audio. Okay. You good? All right. When I was asked to give a talk today, Edward told me that I could talk about STEM, I could talk about many different things, and he said, maybe what the group might want to hear is a little bit about your book. And I said, well, my book, by the way, this is a bad advertisement. Here's my book. I'll put that right here so you can see that as I talk. No. But my book is called Reno, and it actually does tell my story. And what I wanted to do this evening, in very short order, because he said I only had 15 minutes, is to talk about 3 chapters in that book, which I think is relevant to the message that you're trying to deliver to young people here. Let me, when I talk to groups, I usually get 3 questions that are asked most frequently, especially when they find out that I'm an astronaut. The first is, Dr. Harris, what is it like to travel in space? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. The second question I get is, Dr. Harris, you've been in space, what was it like, and did you see any aliens? And so let me just answer that question right now. No, I didn't see any aliens. But I can tell you some of the astronauts that I flew with were very strange, probably including myself in that category. And then the last question that I was asked, no matter whether it's a 5-year-old or a 65-year-old, everybody wants to know this question. Anybody want to guess what that is? How to go to the bathroom in space. And since we finished dinner, for the first time ever in my speeches, I'm going to tell you right off the bat how to go to the bathroom in space. You guys ready for that? No, not today. Not today. Catch me afterwards and buy me a drink, maybe I'll tell you something. So let me just talk about the 3 chapters. In chapter 2 of my book, I talk about, it's titled The Woman's Touch. And it actually has a quote from, you won't believe this, James Brown. Remember James Brown's song when he said, "This is a man's world"? And then how did he follow that up? He said, "It wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl." Exactly. So in that chapter, what I try to do is I try to talk about the influence that women had in my life. And by default, also men had in my life. But certainly, the woman in my life was my great-grandmother by the name of Honey, who gave a message through several generations that probably made it to me. And that was how important life was, how important it was to have expectations that are higher for every generation. Now, why is that so important? Because as I look at what's happening in our community, the African American community, I think that we have low expectations of ourselves. And it's not just the African American community anymore. It's the Latino community, it's the Hispanic community, it is the white community when you look at what's happening in education, right? So years ago, when I started the Harris Foundation, we started the Harris Foundation centered around minorities, trying to get minorities involved, not only in education, but to get them involved in math and science. And if you look at the stats these days, it's no longer a minority issue, it's an American issue. Because as I will tell some of my majority, and I use that in quotes, brothers and sisters, not even their kids are going into science fields that are relevant for the 21st century. So what you're doing in your community, focusing on STEM, is so important. And since we're living in a world where there is no majority, that we are a nation of minorities now, if we don't ensure that all our communities have the same ability to take care of themselves and take care of their families, then we're going to lose in the long run. And a lot of corporations represented by a number of your board members here recognize that. That's why they are supporting you. That's why they're here this evening, because they see this as a real issue, a workforce issue, a competitive issue. But it all starts with the expectation that we get, that our kids get from home. So my first message to you from that chapter in the book, second chapter of the book, is to raise your expectations. Not only your individual expectations, but the expectations that you have for our young people. Now, I was in Atlanta. I just flew back this afternoon, like a couple hours before coming here, and I was actually on the set of a new movie like Queen Latifah, who's going to be part of that, and Jill Scott is going to be a part of that, and Felicia Rashad is going to be a part of that. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about them. I'm going to talk about the assistant of the director, who was a young lady, about 25, 26 years old, who had all of this energy. And she was telling me about what she wanted to do. And here she was, she had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and here she's being an assistant, kind of a gopher for the director, being a special assistant to make sure everything was okay. But when you listen to what the things, when she talked about herself, and you listen to what she had accomplished and where she wanted to go, I was just amazed that this 25-year-old, that she had all of these high expectations. You know what she said to me? She says, I'm Nigerian. And in Nigeria, the families really push you from the time in which you're born all the way up until you accomplish what you're doing. They expect that you're going to do well. They expect that you're going to finish high school. They expect that you're going to finish college, that you're going to go on to being a lawyer and doctor or whatever. They have high expectations. And when I think about that, because of her culture of high expectations, here she is getting ready to soar. And you're going to hear this young lady. Her name is Faith. And Faith is going to be a very popular, a very famous person one day because of her high expectations. So my first message to you this evening is that let's raise the expectations of our young people, because in the long run, it not only helps them, but helps us all. In chapter 3, I talk about the expanding mind, and I put a quote in here from Henry Ford, and it says, whether you think you can or you can't, you usually are right. Think about that. So this has to do a lot about what you think you can and what you think you can't do. So a lot of people think that I can't do that. Someone say, well, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be an astronaut. I had a lot of people, when I was thinking about aspiring to be an astronaut, telling me that I couldn't do it. Why? Because this was in the 60s, and there were no black astronauts visible. There were no minorities at all in the space program. And what we saw in that program were white guys climbing on board the vehicle and blasting off into space. And that's what, going back to my first point, that's what we expected. And because of that, we expected that if a little African-American boy said he wanted to be an astronaut, then, wait a minute, he can't do that. So for a long time, when I was growing up, probably from the moment, I think about 13 is when I decided I wanted to be an astronaut, till I was probably about 20 or so, I kind of kept that secret. I didn't tell anybody, because I didn't want anybody to tell me that I couldn't do it. Because I knew in my heart that I could do it. So my message to you, and especially to the young people, is that start thinking about what you want to do now. Hold that close and dear to your heart, and I firmly believe if you do that, the universe will conspire to make sure that that thing happens. And don't listen to anybody that tell you that you can't do it, because if you do, then you will not do it. But if you hold it to your heart that you can do it, and surround yourself with those people who are positive, who are telling you that are lifting you up, there is nothing that you can't do. And as I always tell young people, if you're going to dream the biggest dream you can. Dream bigger than the biggest dream that you can. It's important. The last chapter that I talk about is One Giant Leap. And this centers around the notion of fear that we all have. Whether we are just kids going through school or adults in our daily jobs, you think about this. So many of us are held back by fear. Fear of success, fear of failure, especially. We won't take that step because we're afraid that we might fail. Imagine if I had not taken that step to go to medical school, or taken that step to go into space, and taken that real big step to do a spacewalk, where I would be. If I allowed fear to cloud my mind and to cloud my ambition, I wouldn't be here standing before you today. I had to overcome that same fear. I didn't start off as being, confident. You already heard that, when I said that I want to be an astronaut, people were telling me that you can't do that for whatever reason. So deep inside of me, there was that seed of negativity planted in me that said that I couldn't do it. And part of my growth as an individual was reaching a point that I could get rid of that fear so that I could accomplish the things that I have done today. And because I overcame that fear, I'm here today as both an astronaut, as a physician, and now as a venture capitalist for that. That fear allowed me to climb on board the space shuttle, not just one time, but twice. Getting into this vehicle that weighs still 5 million pounds, being catapulted into space to the tune of 7.5 million pounds, being pushed back from your seat to 3.5 times your weight, feeling like you weigh almost 1,000 pounds under that force, getting into space in less than 8.5 minutes, traveling at speeds in excess of 17,500 miles an hour. That's a ride, as you say. Heck of a ride. And getting into space and traveling around the world every 90 minutes. That's what 17,500 miles an hour allows you to do. Go around the world every 90 minutes, see the sunset or sunrise every 45 minutes. Pretty awesome to be out there. But I would not have done that if I had let fear determine my destiny. You can't do that. So it allowed me to be elevated to another place where I had a different view of the earth. A lot of people ask me about that view. They say, what was it like to look back at the earth? So if I could share that with you, imagine that you're in this spacesuit. That weighs about 350 pounds. But of course, it's a weighty thing because we're in zero gravity. And you open the hatch, you go out for the very first time. And I remember the first impression that I had when I opened up the hatch and I saw the earth down below was that I was going to be sucked out of the airlock and I was falling. After I'd overcome that fear, speaking of fear, I went outside, connected up my tether, and then went outside, and it was incredible. Got on the end of this robotic arm, and he raised the robotic arm about 35 feet above the payload bay where I had this God's eye view. It was beautiful. You can imagine this big blue ball, these swirls of white clouds, and behind that this sea of stars like you would know. It was just incredible. From that perspective, it allowed me to see the earth the way I believe that God sees the earth. So one people, no differences, can't see colors up there. In fact, I always kind of joke that if an alien came to this planet, you think he would sort us out by colors or sexes? No. He would either embrace us, or she would embrace us, or they would just shoot us on the spot with the radar. But becoming an astronaut allows you to have that perspective, and that's a perspective that I always like to share with audiences. But these days, I'm on a new mission, and that new mission is about empowering individuals. That new mission is about empowering communities. That mission is very similar to the mission that you have here this evening, the mission of this organization. I believe that education is the key to succeed. Education is the key to success. I believe that education is the launching pad for all of our, or anyone's success. No matter what you do, whether it's formal education or informal education or education through experience, you can't get there. Always say that this country needs knowledgeable people. And what's the other word for knowledge? Education. It's important for you to remember that. I also believe that education is the way in which to fulfill dreams. No matter what your dream is, education is the key. But in the 21st century, we got to think more than just education. We need to be thinking about STEM education. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Why? Because 9 out of the 10 jobs in this century require expertise in math and science. And I would dare to say that it's 100%. Have you ever been to the mechanic lately? Automobile mechanic? Right? Which you would think would be a manual job. What is the first thing that they do when they pull your car to the stall? They connect it to a computer. Right? And we've already heard from Ray that how important doing that is and what you can do with technology. So those things are so critical. So no matter whether you're thinking about becoming the President of the United States, becoming an astronaut, or becoming a teacher, it all requires half the science. So let me applaud you for what you've done. Now, there's one other thing I want to share, and I'm going to sit down because my 15 minutes are up after, right? Is that spacewalk. I want to go back to that spacewalk. That spacewalk where I had you visualize being outside and looking at the Earth and seeing the stars and the Milky Way behind that. I realized when I was experiencing that, if you could imagine that this was at the end of our workday, we had already been out for about 5 hours, and now we were just taking it all in. And as I was sitting out there, looking down at the Earth, I felt about this big. And then suddenly I went from being this big to being larger than life, with this realization that I was doing something very few people had done. That I was one of 350 astronauts, people who have gone into space. And that's worldwide. That's astronauts and cosmonauts, and now the Chinese call their astronauts kinkernauts. 350. That I was one of about 75 people who had a chance to don that 350-pound suit, that EVA suit, extravehicular activity suit, that's what we call it, spacewalk suit, and walk outside. That I was one of 15 African Americans who had ever gone into space. And that on that particular mission, I became the first African American to walk in space. Now that was something else. And why? Because of a dream that I had when I was your age. A dream that enabled me to see beyond myself. A dream that enabled me to raise my expectations of what I even thought of myself. A dream that allowed me to overcome fear and overcome adversity. A dream that allowed me to go through all of the education and all of the training that is required to be there. And it was worth it. It was indeed worth it. Dreams are powerful if you use them appropriately. So, what do you think my message is? Go out and buy my book, Dream Walker? No. Dream the biggest dream that you can. And nothing is impossible if you believe in yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. That was so inspirational. Still dreaming, big dreams.